Hello, I wanted to share with you a tutorial for watercolor on how to make a landscape painting. This tutorial is great for practicing getting some values done in watercolor, and it's been a very popular one for people. When I've done them, they usually sell really quickly. There are a lot of people that really like this look. It's a very calming look. So here's the example of the one that we're going to do today in this video. It started off really light, and then you can see I kind of built up the layers a little bit darker and darker, and then super dark here. This is supposed to be very similar to where I live in Wisconsin. We've got lots of bluffs, and then the Mississippi River is right near where I am, so I wanted to paint something similar to that. You could really play around with a lot of different colors for this too. You can make it in shades of orange or shades of pink or blues or whatever. So have fun with this, play around with it, and it's a great way to practice your watercolor painting. All right, today I'm going to work on a landscape painting. It's a little bit more of an abstract type design, kind of inspired by the bluffs that I am living by currently in Wisconsin. For my paints today, I'm using Shinhan Professional watercolor paints. It's a set that comes with 20 different colors. They come in tubes like this, and I take the tubes and squeeze them into my little paint palette here. And then this is really nice because it folds in half, and I write which paints I have in each palette, so I know which palette I want to use. And this is one of my favorites that I've been using so far for my watercolors. So the entire set, the 20 colors, I believe was about $50 on Amazon, and it comes in a variety of sets. You can buy a lot of different numbers, but it's definitely been one of my favorites to use. I think the colors are pretty vibrant. I'm starting off by just wetting down my page. You can see I've got a long, thin page to make kind of a long, thin landscape. And I'm going to start with just a real light, subtle blue. And since my paper is wet, the blue just kind of spreads out wherever the water is. I want to keep it really light and watery, so I'm not using a lot of pigment, but instead just trying to get some color on the top part of my paper. Now this is going to be a reflective piece, meaning that I might have some water showing down here, so I'm going to go ahead and throw a little bit of color along the bottom as well. I may be kind of mirroring my layers to make it look like it's reflecting. The bluffs are I guess created because of the Mississippi River, so it's kind of carved its way down to create these nice bluffs on both sides of Wisconsin and Minnesota. So I'm probably going to indicate this river down below. It's such a pretty area. All right, I'm going to let this dry. If I would go in and start doing my bluffs right away, it would kind of just bleed into my sky, and I don't want to do that. So I'm going to just kind of let this dry a little bit before I go into my next step. All right, now that my first layer has dried, I'm going to use the same blue, but I'm going to mix it with a little bit of green. It's kind of a sap looking green. And I'm going to start my first layer. Now I want to start up kind of high so I don't have tons of just empty sky, especially since I've got such a long skinny paper. You can see I'm pointing my brush towards the top and then just kind of dragging it along where I want my line to be. And again, this is a little bit drier than my first one. You can see I didn't wet the paper down, but I do want it to be pretty soft, so I'm going back in with water and just kind of scrubbing at the line that I just did, just to kind of soften it up a little bit. And I want my line to go to a little bit below the halfway point, so I'm scrubbing at this line, trying to do it while it's still wet. If I let it dry, then it'll create this hard line like this, where I don't really want that. So I want to make sure to get that while it's still wet, and kind of by adding just plain water, it'll just kind of soften it and bring it down into the, well, it'll be eventually behind the layer in front of it. So just adding some water, and the paint will follow the water. So wherever there's water next to wet paint, then it should kind of follow into that. I do want my top line to be pretty hard, so you can see that it's a nice solid line, but it softens as it goes down. Now I'm going to go ahead and try to mimic this line a little bit. I want it to be a little bit lighter, so I might add a little bit more water. And I'm going to have the same type of silhouette, try to kind of mimic. This is actually a very good drawing exercise. It helps your eye and your hand coordination if you try to mimic in reverse what you've done along the top of the paper. When I taught high school, I'd have my high school students do different exercises with something like this. It's great exercise. So I'm going to go ahead and fill that in. You can see it's a little more subtle than the top one. All right, now this is not perfectly dry, but I'm going to try going in with my next layer anyway. I'm not always patient enough to let the whole thing dry. Every layer I do, I want to get a little bit darker and a little bit more green, more rich. So I'm going to do maybe less of the light blue, maybe go for a little bit of a darker blue. This is ultramarine mixed with a little bit of the sap green, a little bit of the viridian green. And I'm going to go ahead and make my next layer and see kind of how it does. If it bleeds too much, I can't get a line, I may have to kind of come back and try again. I'm going to try my luck here, see how we do. So my goal with my second layer is to not make my ups and downs happen at the same direction. So you can see this went down, this goes up. So try to vary it a little bit so it's not all the same. And again, I want to just kind of have that bleed into the foreground a little bit. Blend it in. As I go darker, I'm trying to do a little bit more paint and a little bit less water for each of my layers. I'll go ahead and blend this down into my horizon line, which is right about a little bit below halfway down my paper. I may make it a little lower. In art, you kind of have what's called the rule of thirds, where ideally you want your picture divided up into thirds. So if I have my horizon line kind of about 1/3 up the page, that's probably better than having it smack dab in the middle. So I like to kind of push it down just a little bit. So I have like 1/3 water, 1/3 land, and then 1/3 sky. Makes for, I guess, a better painting. All right, I'm going to mimic this, but I'm going to make it a little bit closer to the other one. the reflection works a little bit differently. A little soft. Nothing too fancy. All right. We're going to let this dry, and then I'm going to go ahead and add a darker line yet. Okay. For my next level, I'm going to go a little bit more pigment, so more of this sap green, some of this viridian green, some of this ultramarine blue. I want it to be quite a bit richer in color, less water. And I'm going to really be more bold with my brush strokes here. So I want a pretty distinct line. Every once in a while I may use a little bit more of one of the colors just to kind of make it stand out so it's not all the same. I don't want things to be too boring in the middle, so if I see a part maybe in these two that looks too similar, I may really try to spike the next level up a little bit just to give it more interest in that area. I don't know, you can kind of play around with this. It's a fun exercise. You can try it a bunch of different times, different color variations. I've done this a lot with turquoise because that's my favorite color. But these colors are more true to where I live. Lots of kind of these blue greens, especially on a cloudy day. It kind of has this misty look about it. I don't mind kind of remixing my colors every time. It'll make it a little more interesting. Now none of my layers are overlapping right now, but if I wanted to have a section of this layer, for example, kind of jump up and overlap one of the other ones, I could. Like right up here, maybe I'll have it go higher than my second layer and then come down. You can do that. Using just a round brush for this, it really doesn't matter what kind of brush you use. If you're more comfortable using a flat brush, you could do that too. I'm going to do one more layer here while I've got this, and I might actually just add a little bit of detail here in the water to show that there is a darker layer kind of coming in. I'm going to break it up a little bit. This water's moving, so I'm going to kind of show some variety in this layer here. Keep it pretty loose. All right, the last layer I want to do pretty dark, so I'm going to keep with the same colors. I'm going to use that ultramarine blue, the kind of the sap green, and a little bit of the viridian green. And I'm going to go pretty dark. So this is kind of that main layer here. And I'm going to try to get a little bit more detail in the silhouette. So maybe make it look a little bit more tree-like. Although that last one looked pretty tree-like too. This is a great exercise practicing values, similar to my tree painting one where I did a forest where you kind of play around with different shades of the same, basically the same colors, and get darker and darker. It's great for practicing your control on your brush, how much water you use. Watercolor is pretty much all about how much water you have on your brush and controlling that amount to make it do what you want it to do. This is kind of blending a little bit too much, so I'm kind of going back in, maybe giving it a little more blue so that this layer stands out from the one in front. It's probably because this was still a little bit wet, which is okay. You can see how this and this was wet, so it's kind of bleeding into that, but I don't mind. I'm just going to let it happen. Just adding some tree-like shapes. Again, just kind of playing. Go nice and dark. A little bit more paint, especially along the bottom edge, because I want that to be nice and rich in pigment. Okay, I could leave it like this, but I think I'm going to add just a little hint of something in the corners, just for some interest down below. So I'm going to go really dark. Again, I'm going to get my blue and my green, and then I'm also going to add some purple. If ever I want my greens to be a little bit darker, purple is a good color to kind of dull them a little bit, but then also darken them. And I'm going to put a little bit of land here in the front, like you're kind of standing on the other side of the river here, looking out. So I'm just going to do a hint of some land, maybe along the edges here. You could do it all the way across if you wanted. I'm just going to put a little bit on each side, like that. And if you wanted to indicate maybe grass or bushes or something, you could do that. I think I might just leave it like that. We'll see. If you wanted to do grass, I guess I can demonstrate that too. I would switch to a smaller brush, something like this, and just kind of throw a couple little blades of grass in here, some plants. Make it look like you're hanging out on the other side. Once I got my little blades, I might add a couple little dots to give them some leaves or something, some kind of weeds that are growing, I don't know. Give them some interest. If I do it on one side, I better do it on the other side too. So just using the real tip of my brush and kind of pulling it upwards here. Grass is another one that takes some practice. Try to go a couple different directions as I do it. Real light, barely touching my brush to the paper, and then lifting off as I get higher up on the grass. Now I'll throw a couple little dots around it so it looks like it has maybe a couple leaves going on. And give it some interest. If I wanted to get really fancy, I could add a tree, so I can show you quick how to do that. The same dark color, maybe I'll even mix a little bit of brown with it here. I'm just going to put an indication of a tree in the foreground, and I'm going to start on one of my pieces of land and just do a line that goes up like this. I know a lot of my students, when I do this, it's kind of a scary thing because you're making such a dark line right across your picture, but it's okay, you can do it. I'm going to do two. And because they're so close, they go all the way up off the top. And then I may just give them a couple branches that are kind of floating going to just mix my greens again, and I'll just add a couple little leaf-like things here floating around. You don't have to make every little branch connect. People will look at it and they'll know it's a tree. So I know a lot of people, when they make trees, make these sticks and then add little dots that connect to the sticks, but you can just kind of play around like this and people get the idea. Sometimes I like doing my leaves first, and then I will go in and add the branches afterwards to kind of connect to some of the leaves. So maybe I'll use my smaller brush now with some of my brown green mixture here, and then I can throw a couple of branches in there to indicate that these are actually connected to the tree. Doesn't take too much. And of course it goes off the page anyway, so throw a couple little twigs out there. Maybe a branch that goes a little bit off the side here. Okay, so just kind of keep playing around. This is a nice little practice with watercolor to practice the values, practice some of the brush strokes to get the idea of a basic landscape. So hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching. I'll go ahead and take off the tape so you can see what it looks like with everything undone. All finished. Always taking the tape off is nice. It gives it such a complete look. It's a frame in itself, just taking the tape off. Nice crisp edges. And there you have it. Masterpiece.